This is one of the series of postgraduate dissertation or research project checklist, and this is the fourth checklist on findings analysis chapter. The marking criteria and mark sheet of the findings analysis chapter have also included conclusions and recommendations section. So as you can see from the mark sheet, under analysis 20% of the marks, it has three sections: analysis of data, discussion, and conclusions and recommendations. So in today's presentation, we just focus on analysis of data and discussion. Okay, as highlighted under the marking criteria, for outstanding piece of work, students need to demonstrate outstanding ability to analyze data critically with very high level of creativity, originality, and independence of thought, and shows outstanding levels of accuracy, technical competency, and organizations. So that is for the analysis of data. So this corresponds to what you have discussed under your data analysis method in the methodology chapter. So if you have, for example, mentioned you would use SPSS for quantitative data analysis or NVivo software for qualitative analysis, that would fall into under the outstanding criteria with technical competency. Okay, and then it says you demonstrate a significant capacity to develop a sophisticated and intellectually rigorous argument based on a sophisticated understanding of relevant literature and of the data, balancing appropriately between data and theory in the development of critical analysis, evaluation, leading to the conclusions. So that is where the discussion is bad. So discussion is where you need to make sense of your data by referring to what you have found with what other researchers or scholars have discussed under the literature review chapter. Findings analysis chapter is normally the fourth chapter of a postgraduate dissertation or research project. It normally starts with the introduction section and finishes with a summary section as any other chapters. And then in the main body is the findings and analysis and discussion section. So findings is where you clearly and accurately presenting and describing what was found from the research, as you have described under the data collection methods in the methodology chapter. For example, if you have mentioned your research is a primary research using online survey, this is where you're presenting the survey findings. Yeah, and if you mention your research is a secondary research using particular database or annual report of a particular company, this is where you need to present what have you found from the secondary source or annual report. Okay, and every research is different, so you may not necessarily put the findings in the main body, but may put the findings in the appendices. And for example, you may present findings question by question or group them into themes. Or you may include key findings in tables and figures in the main body and place the lengthy findings in the appendices, for example, the interview transcripts or the annual report. Okay. And then most importantly, you must include analysis discussion section in this chapter. It is where you are making sense of your findings and in comparison with the literature. So to say whether there's any similarities or differences or any new contribution to the literature. So the way how you analyze that should be corresponding to the data analysis method as you have discussed in the methodology chapter. Okay, so whether you've used SPSS or whether you used NVivo thematic analysis. So the way how you present it is differently. So you may look into the key concepts or themes, or you may discuss them in response to the research objectives. So most important is that you make sure the flow and the consistency of the analysis. So some students might group findings analysis together, and some students might place them as two separate sections. You can discuss with your supervisor if you are not clear. Now let's look into the checklist of this findings analysis chapter. So start with the findings section, so where you're presenting, describing the data. Have you been consistent with the methodology chapter where you're presenting and describing the findings? So for example, have you presented the findings originated from the data collection methods as you discussed in the methodology chapter? So for example, if you say your research is collected from survey, so have you presented the findings from survey? So if your research is secondary, you may say it's from an annual report. So have you put the accurate annual report as the findings or data of this research? Okay. And then have you presented or analyzed the findings using the data analysis tools as discussed in the methodology chapter? So for example, you may say for qualitative research, you would use thematic analysis using NVivo software. So have you used NVivo software and analyzed it using thematic analysis? If your research is quantitative, you may say this research look into the correlations, regression, or t-test using SPSS. So you must check whether you have used SPSS looking into the correlations, regressions, and t-test in this chapter. Okay. So have you placed lengthy detailed findings or data in the appendices? So although this is findings, but not every single piece of information you found is appropriate to be placed in the main body due to the word limitation of a research project. So therefore, for very lengthy and detailed findings, you may need to put them in appendices to verify your research. So for example, the interview transcripts or the annual report of a particular company. Okay. So have you included essential key findings, including direct quotations in the body? So having said not every single piece of information is appropriate to be placed in the main body, but the key information must be extracted from the findings and be placed in the main body to support your point and argument. Okay. So have you used appropriate tables or figures to illustrate or demonstrate your findings? So for example, you may use Excel or SPSS, and there may be figures need to be placed in the main body. And have you used them? Okay, so you may just draft a table for your qualitative data, and have you used them to clearly present what you have found to the reader? Okay, and have you used the figures and tables accurately? So where you must use numbered headings and with appropriate title and cross-referenced in the text. Okay, have you conformed to the ethics guidance when you're presenting and analyzing the findings as approved for this research? And it's very important in this section you still conform to the ethics. So if you mentioned, for example, for primary research, the anonymity and privacy of the participants, and you must stick to it. You must not disclose their personal information, even including the interview transcript, for example. You don't disclose them, okay? So next, you have to check your discussion. So where you're analyzing and evaluating the data. So have you included an analysis or analysis and discussion section in this chapter? Even if this is not a separate section, have you clearly discussed and evaluated your findings? Yeah, this links to the next checklist. Have you demonstrated intellectually rigorous argument in this section as the marking criteria indicated? So that means you need to check whether you have compared your findings with existing literature, as you have discussed in the literature review chapter. Any similarities, differences between your finding and what the researchers and scholars have already discussed. Have you critically evaluated your findings by cross-referencing them to each other? Okay, so for example, you may compare the findings from different participants. So participant A suggests this, participant B's main idea is that, and why they have different views. Is that because of where they're from, or the position they hold, or the demographic information so they possess? Okay, and then you may also look into the responses between different questions and how the earlier question might help you to make sense of the questions later. Okay, so have you used appropriate phrases or terms to signpost your analysis discussion? So this is very important because this section is where you're making sense of your data with reference to the literature. So if your findings are similar to the literature, so with similar ideas, you may use the terms like likewise, similarly, besides, corresponds to. If another participant's findings and then support a previous participant's, so you may add in a point, signpost for adding points. In addition, additionally, participant 3 support participant 1, 2. Okay, so if your findings are different from the literature, so where you may have to use however, nonetheless, on the other hand, so the findings contradicts to what Smith 2009 suggests. Okay, so it's very important you're using appropriate phrases and terms to signpost your discussion and evaluation. Now, have you accurately included the original data or quotations whenever necessary? So although this is a discussion section, but it is important when you want to make a point or strengthen your argument, you're referring to the direct quotations from the original data, okay, where you may use signposts like, for example, for instance, and then to strengthen the point. So have you referred to the literature or theory to construct the argument? So as we mentioned, so you must refer to some sources or literature as you have discussed in the literature review, okay? So in here, so normally you use the literature that has already been included in the literature review chapter instead of using new literature. Have you included appropriate in-text citations in Harvard format? So it's important you just don't put, Smith there, and you need to use appropriately as Smith 2019, for example, okay? Now you need to check the overall academic writing structure of this chapter. So have you clearly organized the findings and discussion sections, whether they're separate or they're together? So it's important you indicate to your reader you have done both. Have you avoided putting original lengthy data or findings in the body, for example, the interview scripts, as we mentioned earlier, or annual report, okay? But only extract the key findings to strengthen your point and argument. So it's important you don't put, 2 questionnaire answers in the body. Have you avoided using any personal phrases? So again, you should not use I found. Instead, you would say the researcher found, okay? And have you used passive tense whenever necessary? So instead of saying, as you can see from the figure above, you should say, as can be seen from the figure above. So academic style is very, very important. So no personal phrases should be presented, and you need to use third person or passive tense whenever necessary. Have you accurately cross-referenced the relevant figures and tables appendices? And they are consistently referenced as well, so you don't jump from figure 1 to figure 4. And you must include very detailed information, participant 1 in appendix 1, for example. Yeah? Have you applied accurate tense in this chapter as well? So similar to the tenses in the methodology chapter, and the tenses in this chapter can be a bit complicated. And for example, you must use present tense mostly in this chapter where you're explaining, describing your findings and discussing them. But at times when you refer to the direct quotations, you may use past tense. For example, you may say, for example, participant 1 commented. Yes, we're using past tense. So have you used the number headings and subheadings appropriately in this chapter to clearly indicate your organization of the chapter? And as we said, whether findings and discussions separate or together, and ensure the logical sequencing between different sections as well, and between the points where we mentioned using the appropriate phrases and terms, which we also call them linking phrases. So finally, please make the best use of the support from your supervisor, your first point of contact for advice, your module leader who would be able to direct you to the right person, or your module site might contain some useful information, but key resources is what you must utilize. I hope the above helps for you to improve your findings analysis chapter. If you have any doubts with what is presented, please feel free to contact me. Thank you. Best of luck.